And we're recording. Steve Maxwell, thanks for being on Fitness and Consciousness.
Thank you very much for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah, so there's like one book that I can say really changed my life, and that's the Russian Kettlebell Challenge. And I pulled it off the library shelf about like 9 years ago, something like that. And you were in that book, and you had a lot to do with that system. So how did that happen? How did you get involved with Pavel? And
I had read an interesting article in Milo magazine. It's a strength journal that comes out 4 times a year. And I always liked Milo because it was pretty much down to earth, not a lot of hype. Most of the modern fitness magazines are just, basically supplement catalogs for worthless supplements. And Milo, I liked it because it was kind of like that old school stuff you would have got back in the 40s and the 50s. And it was basically based on strength, not how much you look, but, what can you do? Mm-hmm. So I like that. Anyway, Pavel wrote a very funny article called Pickles, Vodka, Pickles, and Kettlebells in the Morning. Russian cure for hangover. And I got intrigued with this whole Russian kettlebell thing after reading that article. This must have been about 1998. And so I thought, I saw that the author was listed in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I thought to myself, well, how many Satsolians can be in the phone book in Minnesota? And as it turned out, there was 3. And I talked to him on the phone. He never met me before, and we really hit it off. He was really excited to talk to someone interested in this, and we agreed to meet at the Arnold Schwarzenegger fitness show, which was just a few months down the road. And so we met, and we talked, and at that time, he was hooked up with Dragon Door, and I met with him and his publisher. And the manufacturer of the kettlebells was Torque Athletic. So I met this guy that was, so the 4 of us sat down to dinner. And I believe Warrior Hoffmeckler was there too, the guy that did the Warrior Diet. And it was really fun. And he told me that he was having an actual certification in teaching kettlebell training his way, and asked me if I wanted to be a guest instructor. So I said, sure. Sounds great. I had actually made a set of stainless steel kettlebells because you couldn't find them. You couldn't buy them anywhere. So I actually had one of my jiu-jitsu students fashion me a pair out of stainless steel. He worked in a metal shop. So I had a pretty good idea of how to use them, but wasn't quite sure. So when I went to that very, very first certification, Pavel showed me a lot of stuff, but then I showed him a lot of stuff too. And that's how the whole RKC and the whole American kettlebell movement got started. It was me and Pavel.
Yeah, it really blew my mind because I don't think I'd ever seen. I mean, I'd seen since I was just a real little kid, like very young, 7, 8, 10 years old, getting all the Arnold magazines and Muscle and Fitness and all those. I didn't realize they were all on steroids. I didn't understand what was going on, but I was always attracted to that like hero that I wanted to be this big, strong, powerful guy. And then like here's this guy. He doesn't look like Arnold, but he Pavel kind of embodied what it is that I want. At that time, I didn't really care about getting bigger, but I wanted to be stronger, faster, and be able to apply that to martial arts. And it seems like Pavel, it's like everything he said made sense. And and it made me want to be a trainer again. Because I started as a trainer in 1999, and I got out of the business in 2001 because I didn't really like what I thought it took to be successful. I was an employee at a personal training studio, and it was the most probably the most successful one in town in Indianapolis. And it was like there were some people doing like some powerlifting kinds of stuff, but mostly the clients would go from one machine to the next, and be on the same program forever. And I mean, it was just, and the owner was a real control freak. And so I quit the business and just kind of trained people out of my garage or backyard, and just my buddies come over, didn't charge anything. And then I found that book, and me and my buddy Ron, we would kind of read the instructions while the other person is doing the get up. Like, okay, now you need to do this. And then because we wanted to really dial that in and be technical. And so I thought, man, if I get back into training, it's only going to be with this guy's certification. And it was just impossible. I was just thinking like 100 snatches in 5 minutes with 53-pound kettlebell. So I was like, man, these guys are just amazing. And it just seemed impossible. And then, I ended up doing it. I have my Strong First certification. I did that a little over 3 years ago. But so it just, and then I, got back into it. Now I can do it my way. And it seems like most of more of the fitness world is like ready for that. Like it's more popular now to be like real functional movement and real, like apply it towards like more about like movement rather than, okay, I'm going to build up my biceps, and then I'm going to work on my triceps, and then I'm going to work on my quads. Like it seems like the world has shifted into kind of where I was back then. Of course, I still had a lot to learn. But so I was like, when I was I knew quite a bit about you before, but when I knew you were coming on the show, I started looking into you more, and I watched all your Joe Rogan podcasts, and I read all the stuff on your website. And you had a lot to do with the get up. So like, where were you learning this stuff that you were showing Pavel before you met him? Like, where did you learn the get up and other?
Well, that was a fairly common exercise back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s. My wrestling coach showed me, Bill Woods at Carlisle High School. And this was in the mid 1960s. And we were using dumbbells, of course. But that was a fairly popular exercise, particularly for wrestlers and grapplers. And, the whole name, Turkish get up, wrestling is the national sport in Turkey, as it is in Iran and some of the other Middle Eastern countries. And they've had protocols in place for building wrestlers for centuries. I mean, literally centuries. So where it actually came from, who knows? I learned it back as a kid in junior high school wrestling. And to me, I thought it was just normal. And Pavel had never seen it before. And he liked it immediately because I realized the kettlebell is actually a pretty good tool to use for get-ups. Certainly a bit safer than a dumbbell or even a barbell.
Yeah, it's a really cool one. Now I've used some like variations of it. So were you doing like kind of like one standard kind, and maybe you mentioned like barbell or dumbbell, and then you got into the kettlebells. But are you doing like a bunch of variations on them?
It's real interesting because my son Zach, I started him. He was in that Russian Kettlebell Challenge book as just a little nipper.
I remember.
And I started training him from a very, very young age. Zach was also featured in Pavel's book, The Naked Warrior. He's that little boy in there that was doing the one-arm push-up and pistol.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Well, Zach and I just sat down in the living room one time and came up with 11 different variations of the kettlebell. And I had shown a lot of these to different people. And it kind of tickled me when Gray Cook and I forget Brett Jones came up with their little DVD. Like that was something revolutionary and new. How we had been doing that in our living room, like probably 10 years before those guys ever came on board. So it's just funny. But as they say, no one owns an exercise. I'm sure that every variation that my son and I came up with, probably somebody 1,000 years ago had done the same thing, maybe with a stone dumbbell or something. God, who knows?
Yeah, we can invent something, but that doesn't mean somebody else didn't invent it too.
Exactly. Just because you discover it, even if it's self-discovery, which is a pretty powerful form of learning self-discovery, but it doesn't mean that there weren't, hundreds of other people that made the same discovery at some point.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how our kind of intuitions line up if you're really trying to be open-minded and follow this way. So you were also involved with like the Gracies even before the UFC. You were weren't you Hoist Gracie's instructor? Strength.
I had heard about the Gracie brothers in 1988. I had read Horion's article in Playboy magazine where he offered to fight anybody from any other martial art, winner take all for $10,000. And no one ever took him up on that challenge, by the way. They'd show up to fight, but they didn't want to pay. But I went out and I actually was at the first seminar on the East Coast that they had conducted and just fell in love with it. I was a former NCAA Division I wrestler, 4 years at Westchester State College. That was a physical education school. And so I had a good wrestling pedigree already. But, once you get out of university, I did coach wrestling for a couple years, but I quickly realized that teaching kids in school wasn't my bag. I much preferred working with adults and started working in the fitness industry, even before there was a fitness industry. There wasn't. And at any rate, having been in the fitness industry all this time, I was looking for something nothing could replace wrestling. I tried mountain biking and I tried biathlons and triathlons and running, and it just wasn't my bag. And I tried various martial arts, but boxing and Muay Thai and so forth. I don't know. It just didn't give me that satisfaction that grappling did. And man, when I heard about the Gracies and this newfangled grappling system, I just fell in love with it. I went to New York City, did that first seminar, and it was a love affair from that on. At these days, they were still working out of their garage in Torrance, California. And then that very next spring, they opened up the first Gracie Academy on Carson. And so I was right on the ground floor. And yes, I did train Hoist Gracie for the first 3 UFCs. Hoist's wife was one of my fitness instructors. I opened up a gym called Maxwell in January of 1990. It was the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in the Eastern Seaboard. There wasn't anybody else, not even Henzo. Nobody was around at that time. So I opened up this school, and just that was the start.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. They are just like that. Yeah, we'll fight anybody in the world. Come and get it. And then the UFC turned it into what it is. And I started jiu-jitsu in like late 97, early 98, something like that, just before my daughter was born. And I do like it was like Japanese style and judo. And then I have some friends that train jiu-jitsu, and so I learned like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from a buddy of mine. He's like second degree under Marcelo Monteiro, he's really good. And but there's a difference, like with the Japanese style. I guess like some of it, 'cause they're not all the same, but like there was a cop in our class, for instance, and he's, so we do punching, kicking, everything. Somebody throws a punch, you kind of block it, you kick them in the groin, you take them down, you hit them, you soften them up with strikes, so you can get your lock or choke or whatever. And there was a cop in our class, and then he started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then he came back and said that like the Japanese style is better for him because he's not going to be playing guard with a gun belt. And I know that you had commented before, like you would go, because you travel around teaching seminars, and you see that like some of these people, if I'm not mistaken, even like some of the black belts, they might be, they're going to be amazing grapplers. If you have a BJJ black belt, you're awesome. But like you mentioned that they don't really have the self-defense, like basics. If I don't want to misquote you, but it was something like that. Can you explain what you mean by that and what they're missing?
Yes. Originally, jiu-jitsu was divided into many schools in Japan. It was the art of unarmed combat. It's the art of the samurai. Some of the schools specialized in strikes, some specialized in weapons, some specialized in forms of grappling, some specialized in strangulation. And basically, if you lost your sword in combat, you needed to close quickly with the enemy and clinch him, because distance would be your enemy if a guy has a sword and you don't. So that was part of it. Jigoro Kano formulated this new school of jiu-jitsu called judo. And in those days, there was all the self-defense. He brought all the top-level jiu-jitsu masters from all over Japan, and they came up with a curriculum. And so they changed it from jiu-jitsu to judo. And but they even had the father of modern karate, Funikoshi, who added to the curriculum. So they had strikes, they had takedowns, they had throws, they had every kind of joint lock you could think of, defense from the top, defense from the bottom, everything. It was all there. Jigoro Kano decided to send his emissaries out to spread this new word of judo, this new type of jiu-jitsu. And by the way, they proved themselves many times in Japan. They had many inter-school fights. People came into the Kodokan judo school and tried to take on Jigoro Kano students, and they always prevailed. So they were pretty formidable. So he sent emissaries all over the world, Spain, France, England, U.S. One of those guys, people was Asa Maeda. And Maeda eventually settled in Brazil, where he taught the Gracie family. He was considered quite gifted and was the winner of a lot of no-holds-barred fights himself. He was a professional fighter. There's actually a very interesting book about him you can buy off Amazon. Anyway, he was the one that taught the Gracie family. And the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu family, they preserved the old-style judo. After World War II, all martial arts were forbidden in Japan. As part of the armistice, after they were defeated by the Allies, they were not allowed to practice martial arts. So judo basically became a form of jacket wrestling with lots of rules. Jiu-jitsu completely disappeared. Karate wasn't even allowed to be practiced in those days. So while in Brazil with the Gracie family, it was like a little time capsule. They kept perfecting the combative nature of judo, whereas in Japan it became more and more sports oriented. So modern judo in Japan pretty much doesn't look anything like the original Kodokan judo. And meanwhile, the Gracie family created a whole educational system. And a big part of that educational system was the stand-up street defense and stand-up self-defense. Weapons takeaways, defense against gun, knife from many, many different positions, against a stick, against a baseball bat. There's even a barroom stool defense if the guy tries to hit you over the head in a bar fight. There was every position you can imagine, both offense and defense, how to prevent from being punched on the ground, standing, kicks, everything. And that was all part of my curriculum. As a matter of fact, Hicks and Gracie actually has a T-shirt. If you don't know self-defense, you don't know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Mm. But what happened, just like judo, it became very sports-oriented, where they pretty much just competed Jiu-Jitsu versus Jiu-Jitsu, and it just became pretty much a ground grappling game, which is a lot of fun, by the way. It really is. You can do it without, too much risk of injury. Even an old guy like me, I'm 65 now, I can still get a mat, roll around, and have a good time, because the big trauma being thrown is pretty much eliminated with the modern rules. But that doesn't mean that is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is basically old judo. Judo, if you like 100 years ago, and it was a very formidable martial art, very formidable. And Elliot Gracie, one of my teachers, was animate about knowing everything, not just on the ground, but standing. And you mentioned like the cop saying, oh, well, I'm not going to be on the ground in the guard. Well, originally the guard was designed when you got put in the ground by a much bigger, stronger guy. No one wants to go to the guard. You go to the guard because you're forced to go to the guard. It's better than the alternative. The alternative would be getting your face punched in by some big guy on top of you. Yeah. The guard was designed to protect you against that, but it was never meant to be something that you specialize in or you would voluntarily go into. You only go there because you get put there, and then you want to get out of it as quick as you can. So a lot of people misunderstand the true purpose of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what it is. They only know from watching Jiu-Jitsu versus Jiu-Jitsu in these competitions. They don't get the idea that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, particularly the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense, is way different, and it's a very formidable martial art. It's one of the big three you have to know for MMA. Actually, you got to know wrestling, you got to know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you got to know some type of striking. So,
yeah, there is. You can see like in some of these fights, and it's pretty much kind of been weeded out. But you'd see like in some of the older UFCs or Pride fights that like you might have the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but maybe he's not very good at takedowns because for like they like my one buddy I was explaining the second degree black belt, he was saying that like with like they were able to like spend more of their time on the ground and like by like pulling guard, like putting your foot in the hip and pulling them down, and then you can spend your time working. Because if the guy throws you, if the judo guy throws you, he spends 5 years on throws, takes you down. Well, then you're on the ground. So instead of spending 5 years on throws, you can spend like a lot less time, be able to pull guard, put your foot in his hip or something, and then you spend that time on the ground, which you're going to get to anyway, and then you're able to. That's why the BJJ guys are beating the judo guys, but you'd see like so much as like some guys would just like lay on their back. It's this professional fight, and they're standing there, they're both standing, and then the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy would just like lay on his back and like hope the other guy just lays on top of him so he can start working. And it starts to look kind of sad, and because they don't have these strikes. And it's kind of funny that like I train with a buddy of mine he's a 4th degree black belt in karate, really good one, and I had traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. Well, during his promotions, they don't break boards, they don't do that kind of stuff. But during mine, so he's at karate class and he doesn't break boards to get promoted, and I'm going to traditional jiu-jitsu class and we're breaking boards, we're busting cement, and we're doing this kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned, and I didn't know that before, that you said Funakoshi actually helped develop the judo system. I didn't know that, like that part of their striking curriculum. So when you're going in,
yes, he was instrumental. He and Jigoro Kano worked together on the original. But you have to understand now, this all has been settled many, 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 many years ago. The Gracie family, in order to prove the efficacy of their jiu-jitsu style, took on all comers: boxers, wrestlers, judo players, karate, kung fu. And in 80 years, they never lost a fight outside of the style. They never lost a fight outside of the style, hundreds of fights. And you can see some of these old black and white fights. Basically, they would go, no gloves, no hand wraps. There was one very, very interesting old black and white of Helson, Halls, Gracie, and Horion. And they go to a karate school and they take on the whole group of karate students. And they basically choke every one of them out. As soon as they would clinch and bring the fight to the ground, it was pretty much over for the karate guys. And they've been doing this for years. When I started my school, and this was 1990, we had many people come in and want to challenge us even. And I would say, wait a second, I'm not a Gracie, I'm just a student. I only have a purple belt. You want to see hoist, but they would say, no, we want to try this out. And all the years I had my school in Center City, Philadelphia, we never lost a fight. We would have even black belts from other jiu-jitsu styles.
Wow.
It's because the ground fighting game of jiu-jitsu is so vastly superior to any other grappling style that once you get the clinch, whether you go down on top or whether you go down with the guy on top of you, it doesn't matter. You're going to submit the guy. Case in point, when I was in my 40s, my late 40s, I was a 4th degree purple belt. I had the winner of the Barcelona Olympics come into my school. And this guy was from Spain, probably maybe, I guess, I forget what weight class. He was like a weight class beneath me, but still, I'm in my 40s purple belt. This is a world-class judo player. And I had no trouble repeatedly submitting him. I had no chance with him on the feet if I used judo rules. But I didn't use judo rules. I used my old NCAA wrestling rules and jiu-jitsu, and it wasn't that hard for me to beat him. He was a tough guy, there's no doubt. He got a couple good throws on me, but it didn't matter. As soon as we hit the ground, it was done. So this has been settled over and over and over. But I think what people question is, do you want to go to the ground in the middle of the street on hard sidewalk, or ice and slush all over the sidewalk? Or of course you don't. You want to avoid that at all costs. But if you tie up with a guy that's a lot bigger and heavier than you, you're both going to fall to the ground, man. Or you are, at least anyway. You do your best to keep from getting hit. And, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is really good at avoiding being punched. And once you clinch up with the guy, if he's that much bigger and stronger, he's going to throw you all over the place. And you're probably going to end up down. But you know how to defend yourself. And as Elliot Gracie said, there's a good chance that if you're smaller and weaker, you can't beat the guy. You can't beat him up. You're not going to beat him. But the important thing is that you don't let him beat you. You may not be able to win or beat him, but he can't hurt you. And that's the brilliance of that self-defense. I recommend every boy and girl take the Gracie Combatives course, and the women's course is the Women Empowered. It used to be called Rape Safe, kind of an ugly word, so they changed it to be a little bit more politically correct, called Women Empowered. Best thing you could get your kid into. Absolutely best. You would never have to worry about your kid being picked up.
Yeah. So when you're going to these, so I can have like a better idea of what you mean by the self-defense. So when you travel around and you're going to your workshops and teaching your workshops at these different schools, so like when they're missing the self-defense part of it, do you just simply mean like standing there face to face? What do you do when somebody throws a punch at you? Is it, and they're not
absolutely punches, kicks? What if someone to grab you by the hair and trying to punch you with the right hand while he's holding your hair with the left hand, or grabs your jacket, or grabs you in a bear hug from behind, or grabs you in a choke from behind? All those things. That's all part of the Gracie curriculum. This is stuff that I learned as a blue belt, as a matter of fact. And they still teach it in Gracie-oriented schools. The problem is it's become so sports-oriented that most schools, they don't even do this stuff anymore. But any Gracie-affiliated school you will find a very complete self-defense program. It's all part of getting your belt. To get my black belt, I had to do 164 self-defense techniques with 3 alternating attackers. It took me a better part of 2.5 hours. This is under House Gracie, Elio's second son. And wow, that was exhausting. That was really time. So not all Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the same. The difference between Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is there is a very well-established, well-formed self-defense, and it's an educational system. It's an actual way of teaching. They actually have designated lessons and a lesson plan. And it was created by Master Elio Gracie and his oldest son, Julio. And it's been pretty much adapted by a lot of people that have taken Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in the U.S. The Valenci brothers in North Miami, they use a very similar system. So it's out there. It's out there, but a lot of guys don't care. A lot of guys just like to grapple and have fun, and just roll around on the ground, and they just want to play the sport, which is fine. I'm not against that, by the way. When I do my seminars, a lot of it is at the sports schools, and many of these guys, they're really interested in how to prevent injuries and how can they keep playing at grappling with each other well into advanced age. You very rarely see many people over 45. And here I am, 65, and I'm still doing it. What's my secret? Well, that's part of the things that I do in my seminars. I show them how to preserve their youthfulness and their vitality and how they can maintain themselves. When you do martial arts, you create a lot of muscle imbalances and so forth. So I show people how to do corrective exercises, prehab, rehab, joint preparation. Also, posture is a real problem with jiu-jitsu guys. And if you have a job where you're sitting at a desk in front of the computer and you're playing a lot of guard, a lot of these guys have horrible posture as the result, which causes a whole cascade of other types of problems. So that's some of the things that I do in my workshops. So it just depends. I wear many hats.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in how. So I'm 39 and I'm looking like I teach a class on Wednesday nights, and I go and train with a buddy of mine, and on Saturday mornings, and learn from him. And I don't like present myself as like a high level teacher or anything, but I've been doing it a long time, and I don't try to present myself as something that I'm not. But I'm interested in having like my system be something that we can do for a long time, forever, really. And just like you're saying, you're 65, you can still do this. And when I'm like looking at some of these like jiu-jitsu guys, like I understand like Hickson has had, of course, he's been in tons of battles, but like a lot of spine problems. Joe Rogan had spine problems. I think his neck. Eddie Bravo, spine problems, and these guys are, they're not really young.
They're young guys, yeah. Well, part of it is their programs are too imbalanced, and the other thing is they're not careful about the way they lift weights. And this may sound like heresy, but the kettlebell is an extremely dangerous tool.
Yeah. And
people should not be lifting kettlebells unless they really know what they're doing. And for any old yahoo to go out and buy a kettlebell and just start slinging it around, you're not gonna last long. You're gonna destroy your joints.
Yeah,
and for that reason, I'm absolutely anti kettlebell snatch. I've just seen too much overuse injuries. I mean, think about hitting a tennis ball with a tennis racket. The tennis racket, 300 grams maybe? And yet people get all sorts of traumatic injury to their elbows just hitting a tennis ball with a tennis racket. Think of Tiger Woods with his 2 major back surgeries, swinging a golf club. What do you think is going to happen when you start slinging around a 24 kilogram or 53 pound kettlebell? You think you're not going to suffer trauma? You're not going to get all sorts of little micro trauma to the joints and connective tissue? that end up getting terrible osteoarthritis when you get to your 40s and 50s? Well, of course you are. You know, there's no free lunch. So you got to be careful the way you lift and the things you do. And you got to ask yourself, why am I doing it? What is the benefit to risk ratio? Is the risk worth whatever perceived benefits? Is there another way I could get the same benefits without the risk? These are questions people have to ask themselves.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, so what's causing these spine injuries, like in jiu-jitsu? Yeah, the lifting stuff aside, I mean, the ballistic forces of kettlebell lifting are huge. 53 pounds might not seem like very much when you're a really strong guy, but when it's falling from 7 feet in the air and you're, I mean, yeah, you have to know what you're doing for sure. But I was thinking, okay, so like looking at like Eddie Bravo's system, and like Hicks, like a lot of it is guard based. And so if you go, like if you're throwing up triangles and stuff, and then you're getting stacked.
Well, that's the thing. I just talked to Hiron about this. Hiron is Horian's oldest son. He's probably one of the best sources of jiu-jitsu information out there. And I don't allow myself to get stacked. Neither Hiron said the same thing, and he's still a lot younger than I am. If I have a triangle or an omoplata, for folks out there that don't know what that is, it's a way of tangling up a guy's arm with your leg so that you can injure the guy's shoulder. But if I have an arm lock, a triangle, an omoplata, and the guy starts to stack me up on the neck, or even if he's just trying to pass my guard, I let him pass. I just let go. I am so confident in my self-defense from the side. I feel completely comfortable with you on top of me cross-side. Even to the point where if you try to punch me, I'm going to put you right back in the guard. Or if you try to punch me, I'm going to be able to kick you. Mm-hmm. Remember, you don't have gloves on when you're doing self-defense. And the gloves that they wear in MMA are usually restrictive to the self-defense guy. It changes everything for the grappler. If we went to a format, you know how they just started bare-knuckle boxing again?
Yeah.
Well, if they went back to bare-knuckle MMA, you would see grapplers win pretty much most of the contest. For one thing, the strikers just couldn't tee off. They'd break their hand just too easily. Mm-hmm. You know, just one missed shot, you hit the top of the head or hit the guy's elbow, boom, your knuckles are gone. And if you went back to that format, you would see grapplers win almost everything. It'd be boring as shit to the average person, by the way. I mean, we might like it. We'd love it. But it would be very boring. Very, very boring. You wouldn't get the spectacular knockouts anymore. You'd have a lot of blood, a lot of facial cuts from knuckles. It'd be a lot less traumatizing to the brain. It's the gloves that cause all the damage. But you would see the grapplers pretty much take over. And the whole idea of training on a day-to-day basis is don't let yourself get stacked. Stop being afraid of letting people pass the guard. Just let them pass. You know, I blame it on the whole point system. There's, the IFBJJ point system. People are so deathly afraid of giving up the 3 points or whatever. It's silly. Let them pass. Save your spine. Save your spine. Don't let people put all that weight on your neck and your head. And for the young guys out there that do that whole berimbolo inversion thing, it's cool. It's a fun little game. I'm glad you're flexible enough to do it. But you're going to find that within the next decade or so, your spine is really going to start to suffer, and you're going to get all sorts of disc problems and everything else. So you just got to stop that if you want to stay in the game. If you still want to be able to get out there in the mat and have fun.
Yeah, that's definitely one that I think is just sometimes it can be hard to avoid. But yeah, getting like stacked and people like afraid to tap. I mean, it's like if you're just at your school and you're training with your partners and people don't want to tap, it's like you're not going to win a trophy for not tapping, but you might have this, oh, my elbow hurts for the last 8 months because but at least he didn't tap me, or maybe, it took him an extra 10 seconds to tap me.
Well, I have 3 rules to everyone if you want to stay in the game. One is tap early and tap often.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to tap, just like you said. The other one, what we already discussed, don't let people stack you up on your neck repeatedly. Just let people pass you guard. And the third one is don't be afraid to tap to a lower belt rank. Mm-hmm. There's this idea that somehow if you're a blue belt, you'd bleed from the eyes not to tap to a white belt. It's ridiculous. If you're in trouble, tap. And the last one is if you get caught in a submission, the mistake's already been made. If you get caught in arm lock, omoplata, or triangle, and fighting your way out of it, well, first of all, the guy already tricked you because you shouldn't even be in the position. But now you are. Usually, fighting out of a submission is where the injuries happen. You might be successful in getting out, but damn, your arm is going to hurt, your elbow, your shoulder, whatever. So if someone tricks me and it's a pretty good hold, I mean, if it's really sloppy, maybe, of course, but I'm ready. And of course, when you're training, the idea is to always take it slow and gradually apply the pressure. Give your partner a chance to tap, man. Don't be one of these guys that rips everything,
Yeah, there's some guys like too herky-jerky, and like the buddy of mine that I learned from, his name is Blake Bruni, and it's cool because he's really good at all kinds of striking stuff. He's like a martial arts encyclopedia, but he outweighs me by like 80 pounds. He's like 3 or 4 inches taller than me, so and his technique is a lot better than mine. But like he'd go for an arm bar or something, and my arm would still be like at 90 degrees, but he would just have it locked up. And then he'd just kind of like looking at me like, are you going to tap? And I'm thinking, when I first started training with him again, I was like, I'm fine. Why would I tap now? And he's like, you're not getting out of this, so you might as well just tap now. And he'd be like, he didn't even, going, like, say he's in the mount going for an arm bar. He'd still be like sitting up, my arm's at 90 degrees, and before he's not even like stretching it out, and he's wondering why I'm not tapping yet. He's like, you're done. You shouldn't have let me get here. And
well, part of that is, as a newbie, you didn't realize the danger you're in. Mm-hmm. It's an acquired thing. It's usually the white belts are the most dangerous, both to themselves and to their partners, because they just don't know what they don't know. But you quickly learn. And you were lucky to have such an understanding and kind partner. He was someone that was really taking care of you, because it would have been very easy for him to injure you, but he didn't. So it sounds like you have a pretty good guy there. But one thing I do admonish everyone, be very careful who you train with. Mm. Now, if you're a white belt or a blue belt or even a purple belt, you may not have any choice. Your instructor is going to put you with who he's going to put you with. But if you, especially in open match, just be very, very careful who you train with. Train with guys that are going to be gentle and fun to train with, that want to match technique, that aren't coming after you. And one of the concessions I've made to the aging process, I rarely will train with anyone much more than 15 pounds over my own weight. More than that, it's just too easy to get hurt. And once you're hurt, once you're over the age of 50, an injury takes a really long time to heal. It's just not worth it. A potential injury in class could be with you for the rest of your life if you're not careful. So I'm very careful and very picky who I train with. And they got to be a technician, someone that's going to play the game of chess, jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu. For the self-defense, you just practice that. You just go through the movements and you practice and get it into your muscle memory. But for the actual grappling part of it, you definitely want someone that is really controlled and know what he's doing. But for a lot of beginner guys, once again, they have no choice. They got to pretty much go with who their teacher tells them to go with.
Yeah. There's like some people that just like want to prove themselves. They're like too competitive or too something, and they just want to win, and Some people just flat
Yeah,
out.
those guys aren't around after 45. Some of them are gone before they're 40. You don't see them anymore. They're gone. They're fat and busted, sitting at home on the couch eating ice cream. They're done.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're talking about like the different like exercises for like having a more balanced workouts and more balanced body. It's like, what kind of exercises are you doing to for the joint health and longevity? What do they look like?
Well, there's this big thing called functional training. But what is functional training? Functional training is anything that makes you stronger is functional. So people disparage machine training, but machine training can be very good if you use it right. I'll remind you, the only undefeated NFL football team to go undefeated and win a Super Bowl was the '73 Miami Dolphins. How do you think they trained? They trained in Nautilus machines. You didn't know that, did you?
Mm-mm.
During the heyday of the Cincinnati Bengals back in the 80s, when they won all those Super Bowls, they were training on Hammer strength equipment. So, for someone to say that machine training is not functional, that's just a bunch of nonsense. It all works. Everything works. Olympic lifting works, powerlifting works, kettlebells work, sandbags work, body weight works, gymnastics work, but it all works the same way. It works the same way by making you stronger. Period. It makes you strong. If you're stronger, you're more efficient. However, some systems destroy the body in the process of building the strength, especially when there's too much emphasis put on the amount of weight or the amount of reps. That can cause some real serious problems when people start sacrificing form in an effort to lift more weight and more reps. But by the time a person's been lifting between 4 and 5 years, you pretty much reached your genetic potential. You're pretty much done. You're not going to get any bigger. You hear people say, "Oh, I don't want to get big." Dude, you couldn't get big if you wanted to. Very few people can get big. It's very, very rare that someone has the potential for getting big gee-whiz muscles. It just doesn't happen. There is a small percentage of people that can, and you usually see them hanging out in gyms. And usually it's the guy with the biggest arms and the biggest chest gets to be the trainer. Not that they know what they're doing. They just happen to have great genetics. So, now they're the trainer. And a lot of times they don't even have a clue in proper training or how to train like just normal businessmen, businesswomen, or even how to train for longevity. Many of these guys end up getting hurt and getting fat themselves. And there's nothing I hate more than a fat trainer. It's like one of these guys that isn't walking the walk. He talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. So anything works. So you got to pick something that A, is compatible with your personality, B, is suitable to your physique type. Obviously, that would eliminate a lot of the things like powerlifting and Olympic lifting for a lot of people. Most people just aren't built to do those type of things. And trying to use a straight sport to make you better at another sport, it works to an extent. There is carryover, but it's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is with general exercise. And it doesn't really matter much what you do, whether it be body weight or dumbbells or barbells, or even some judicious machine use can be good if the machines are designed properly. I'll give an example. Leg extensions could be a fantastic exercise. If you have a knee injury or you're rehabbing a knee or you're prehabbing a knee, leg extension could be a godsend. I'd love to see how a person could rehab their knee from an injury without a leg extension machine. It'd be hard. So, the machines can be good. You have a person that's just too heavy to do chin-ups or pull-ups. Sometimes a good lat pull-down machine can be a really, really good thing to have. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So just to make a blanket statement that machine training is non-functional, that's not true, man. Some pulley machines can be really good for rotational type movements. So, The idea is to work the muscles in a general way, using exercises that take low skill, because the higher the skill level of any movement, the less transfer there is to anything else. So Olympic barbell snatch is a tremendous athletic feat. It takes years to get it down. It would have much less transfer to, let's say, grappling or MMA than a simple deadlift. You get my point?
Yeah.
In other words, why do a barbell snatch? I mean, yes, it's athletic. Yes, it requires explosivity. Yes, it requires tremendous mobility in the shoulders and the spine. But man, you screw that up, you're going to really screw yourself up. You're going to get hurt. And all the time it would take to learn that, wow, that's a sport unto itself. So I would never use that for my athletes. I would never use it. They should be spending their time on the playing field, on the wrestling mat, the MMA cage, the soccer field, the basketball court, the tennis court, the football field. They should be wasting their time learning these strength skills.
Yeah.
Unless they want to compete in that particular sport. If they want to be an Olympic barbell lifter, go for it. But don't think that Olympic barbell lifting is the best way to get better at other sports. So that's my point. And and just basically working general exercise. A push, a pull, a horizontal, a push, a pull, vertical, some type of hinge, some type of squat or lunge, a rotation, an anti-rotation, and then some supplementary exercises for your neck. Very important to work that neck, either with a neck harness or isometrics. Obviously, grip and finger exercises. And a lot of people neglect their feet and their toes and their calves and ankles. So I'm a real big believer in doing foot, calf, and ankle work, as well as wrist and grip work and neck. So, and then, of course, you can always do some supplementary abdominal work and even some back isolation. Back extensions are one of my favorite on a 45-degree back extension bench. One of the best exercises ever for your erector spinae. And it can be pretty simple, If your workouts take much more than 30 minutes, it's too long.
Yeah, you're that makes sense. So you still does everything you own still fit in one bag? Are you still doing that?
It does. I'm right now. I'm on the Greek island of Ikaria in the north of GNC. I'm getting ready to start a 4-day lifestyle training camp. That starts tomorrow evening. And I myself personally are pretty much doing body weight exercises and isometrics, pretty much because I travel all the time. I don't have access to a gym a lot of times, and a lot of gyms I find irritating. I don't like music. I like to really concentrate. I really focus on the breath and the movement. And so for me, being a minimalist with my possessions and traveling to a different country every few weeks, I've also become very minimalist with my workout system. So, I do just basic exercises, dips and chins and pull-ups and pike push-ups and so forth, and various types of squats and lunges and so forth.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So you don't have your own apartment, you don't have anywhere, you just travel, and wherever you are, you're just at that place for a couple weeks or whatever, and you're on to the next place. You don't actually have your name is no lease.
I don't have a permanent address. No lease. I do have a post office box, which serves as my address. You need an address to get a credit card.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to open up a bank account unless you have an address. But I use a UPS box in California. So I'm free to travel. And because I make my money either teaching workshops or I do online coaching, online training for people. I help people with programming, exercise programming, design, diet programs, and so forth. I help people with their health and fitness goals online. It's pretty neat. And then, of course, I have a website where I actually sell downloadable videos, and I have some little booklets, little workout guides that I sell. So between the three things, I'm able to make a living while traveling, and it's really a cool way to live.
What made you decide to not have?
I'm sorry, say that again. There was a little accident in the kitchen there.
Yeah,
a drop dish.
Whoops. So what made you to decide to, you have, I don't know if you had a mortgage or you had some lease, and then you're just like, I'm done with this. I'm just going to live. Everything I own is going to be in a bag. I'm getting rid of, because you don't have a car. You don't have
nothing.
Literally everything fits in a carry-on size bag.
A carry-on size bag.
What?
Actually, I have a little side bag also. I keep my iPad and my cords. I had owned 2 homes with my ex-wife. We moved in a starter house together, and then we moved to a 4-story brownstone in South Philadelphia. And we also had a 2-story gym. We leased the 2nd and 3rd floor of a building in Center City, Philadelphia. And after I divorce is what happened. After I got divorced, I moved into a camper van. And I was working with a pro baseball player that used to play for the Phillies. And he lived in Scottsdale. And I'd always had this dream about just roaming around in a little RV, little camper van. And so part of my condition of employment with him was I would go out to Scottsdale, Arizona. I sold my gym. I signed the house over to the ex-wife. I gave the jiu-jitsu school to a young Brazilian guy I brought up from Rio, and literally gave the gym away. Wow. And went out on the road. And the camper van this baseball player got for me, and it was waiting for me in his driveway when I arrived there in Arizona. And I lived in there for about 3 years. And after my contract of working with him as his trainer was up, I just drove around, just roving around the U.S., just living the RV lifestyle, about 3 years. And then I got a brief stint working as a consultant for the Genentech Corporation in South San Francisco. And once that gig was up, I realized that I had, information is valuable, and people were willing to pay me for information. And I started doing my own workshops and such, and realized there was a real good market in that. Mm-hmm. And I also, at that point, initiated an online training program for people that wanted to work with me and get in touch with me. And it's been a really, really nice way to make my living. And I really enjoy working with people. And of course, because I do travel around a lot, I get a chance to meet a lot of my customers at far-flung places. So
yeah, that would be
that's
really
how it all came about. Life-changing experience. Divorce can do that sometimes. These things can be seeming disasters, or they can be blessings in disguise. Sometimes a seeming disaster can end up being the best thing that ever happened to you. You might not see it at the time, but later you realize, wow, I was really stuck in a rut, and this really blasted me out of there. And it can change your life for the better sometimes. So.
Yeah. Sometimes life makes more sense in reverse. You want some relationship to really work, and then it doesn't, and then this new opportunity opens up, and you're like, oh, well, if I was still in this rut, as you said, whether it's a job or whatever it is, then or a relationship, then it just opens up, and then there's your world, and it sometimes at the time it seems like this really terrible thing is happening, but you got to kind of, I guess, just kind of trust that somehow the universe is working for you and not against you. It seems like it's working against us a lot of times. And so
I call it letting go and letting God.
Yeah. Are
Let the
you,
higher power take over.
yeah, are you a religious guy?
No, I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious at all. I was raised in Christianity and so forth, but I see it as Christianity as a metaphor.
Okay. Yeah, it's um, so you were also on. I mean, I don't need to take up a lot more of your time, but I was watching recently your Joe Rogan podcast, and you were getting into some like kind of I guess you call like esoteric healing practices, and um, are you currently practicing any of those or getting something that's like, so it's like seems like you're trying to be like on the looking for like the cutting edge of.
Well, I'm always exploring and always trying to learn new things. And I'm an outspoken critic of Western medicine. I think it's really failed people from a health point of view, especially from a preventative point of view.
Yeah.
I've even I have plenty of doctors that are actually clients of mine online. And I talk with them about this all the time. And they're in agreement. Western medicine doesn't work, not for prevention, not for health. Where it does work is emergency medicine. Emergency medicine is unbelievable. Battlefield medicine, basically stitching you back together when you get messed up in an automobile accident or something. Unbelievable what they can do, life-saving. But when it comes to actual diet and exercise and nutrition and prevention, they don't know they actually know less than they did 100 years ago. I think they were better even then. People point out like some of these medications and so forth as some boon to civilization, but in many cases they cause more harm than good. So a person can become their own doctor, and just by knowing how to eat and using judicious fasting, you can pretty much cure yourself of just about any kind of sickness or illness. Seriously. I've been to a doctor in 35 years. I almost never get sick. And I fly in airports, the filthiest places on earth. And, some people say, oh, well, you just have a good immune system. But I have a good immune system because I eat really well. And I get plenty of sleep. And I do all the things that you're supposed to do so that your immune system is strong. My gut bacteria, my digestion, everything is good because I take great pains to make sure that it is good. And I reap the rewards of this by having really excellent health. And everyone can do the same thing. I'm not special. I don't have special genetics or anything else. No one in my family had particularly good health, except for my father. And my father had 8 brothers and sisters who all died before they even reached 70 years old. But he reached 94 years old.
Oh, wow.
And he was the only guy to eat really well. He ate very light. And we know that eating light is really key to longevity. He was the only guy that went out and he walked and he ran just about every day. He lifted weights twice a week. So he took care of himself through his diet and his nutrition and his exercise. And he outlived every one of his family. So you don't have to be a slave to your genes necessarily. And if you take matters into your own hand and take a real proactive role in your own health and so forth, you can pretty much go through life skipping and dancing without too many problems.
Yeah, I don't really go to the doctor. I had to go get 11 stitches in my leg the other day, so it's nice that they know how to do that stuff. And
yeah, exactly. That's the kind of stuff that a doctor's great for, when they stitch you back together. Fantastic. You can't beat the modern technique for that type of emergency. But when it comes to actually taking care of yourself, there's much, much better sources. I always recommend people go to Ayurveda, which is like the oldest medical system, some of the older Chinese medical systems. But there was a guy even in America over 100 years ago, Dr. John Tilden, who wrote a book called Toxemia Explained. And in the book, Tilden outlines the nature of disease and the 7 steps of disease. the 7 stages before it becomes a real problem. Your body goes through 7 stages. And recognizing this and knowing what to do, and Tilden, back in the day, even though he was a medical doctor, he opted for fasting and using food as a medicine and nutrition and exercise. And he was adamantly opposed. In those days, they had plenty of drugs, just like they do nowadays. It's even more prevalent for doctors to use drugs. It's a Band-Aid approach, you know. It never gets to the source. The drugs just become a masking agent. There's no curative power in taking drugs or even herbs or pills or powders or potions or any of that stuff. Anyway, Tilden recognized all this more than 100 years ago. And he wrote probably the final word in sickness and disease. And it was called Toxemia Explained. And that's a free PDF. Anyone can download it off the internet. And once you read that book, you'll have tremendous confidence in being able to take control of your own health. And it will make you completely free. And you'll never need a doctor again once you read that. Unless, of course, you need 12 stitches.
Yeah, I'll check that out for sure. It sounds really interesting. So I could pick your brain all day. You have so much.
Yeah, we've run out of time. Unfortunately, I think we could talk all day long.
Yeah, I could talk to you forever. I really appreciate you coming on. This was really cool for me. And like, how can people find your information about you, where your workshops are, your videos? And
I have a website called Maxwell, right? My name, MAXWELL, MaxwellSC.com. I'll say it again, MaxwellSC.com. And on there are my events page where I'm going to be. And I also announce future workshops. There's a lot of articles, videos. I'm on Facebook, so please like my Facebook page. I'm also on Twitter, and I do a lot of the social media stuff. And so spread the word. And I really appreciate the chance to have my voice heard and be on your podcast.
Yes, very cool. So, any words you want to leave everyone with?
Nothing that I can think of. I think I kind of talked myself out. Mm-hmm. We covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But I do a lot of health and anti-aging stuff, maybe even more so than jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is just more of an avocation. My real true passion is pretty much anti-aging and or aging well.
Mm-hmm.
No one gets out of here alive. We're all going to die. But and it's not even adding years to your life. It's adding quality to those years. So even if you die, let's say at 80, as long as you're living each one of those years to the fullest, that's the key. As opposed to getting sick and languishing for 10, 15, 20 years in a walker or a wheelchair. This is something I want to avoid at all costs. So it's the quality, not so much the quantity. And we talk a lot about that in my workshops. And I'm constantly reading and researching. And I'm a student too. So a lot of these places I go around the world, I'm actually studying and learning new things myself. So it's a never-ending journey.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, always a student, sometimes a teacher, as they say. Right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I got to run off, so I appreciate it a lot.
All right.
And hopefully I'll talk to you again soon. Let me know when this is up, okay?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording. I'll talk to you for just a second once I hit pause, okay?
Okay.
All right, thanks again.